Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast.
We're your hosts, Dan.
And Justin. We ask critical questions about the Bible and provide mostly questionable answers. Dan, this week we are in chapter 43 of Genesis.
That we are.
And we already did one encounter between Joseph and his delinquent brothers.
That's right.
And we're about to read the second encounter. It'll be very exciting. The second encounter, by all accounts, is much more dramatic, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Without further ado, then, let's read.
Let's do it.
Let us read verses 1 and 2.
All right. Now the famine was still severe in the land. So when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go back and buy us a little more." So this whole time Simeon is still back in Egypt, like in prison, waiting for his brothers to return.
I mean,
It doesn't look as though anybody in this family is good. But it's not like Jacob didn't. I mean, I presume he can count to 12. You know?
Yeah. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the previous chapter, the brothers wanted to go back, and Jacob prevented them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, as far as I can tell, the blame falls on Jacob's shoulders.
Yeah. I mean, basically, Jacob was perfectly fine with Simeon doing in prison as long as his precious little Benjamin was.
Actually, it brings up a good point. Jacob seems to be the cause of family strife everywhere he goes.
Yeah.
He's the one that caused, theoretically, Joseph to be sold in the first place by his favoritism.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one causing Simeon to languish in prison.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one that caused discord in his family, although that could be his mother's fault too. His mother seemed to put him up to it. Right? He betrayed his own brother.
Oh, what?
Remember when Jacob betrayed Esau by taking his birthright and taking his blessing?
Yeah.
Right?
That's a wow.
He's just,
it's in his blood.
He's been a mix of personality traits. Sometimes you want to like him, sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
Seems like you don't more than you do.
No, yeah. I was like, when do we like him?
So I agree with you. It's really strange that they just decided to leave Simeon there in prison.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple questions arise. Like, first, okay, do you think that they assumed that Simeon was dead? I don't know if they assumed that, did they? They don't have a reason to assume it yet, right?
No, but I mean, I guess if it's been a while, no.
Right. Do you think that they were under the impression that if they returned to Egypt, that they would all be either imprisoned or made to be unalive?
Well, I mean, especially since they've been waiting all this time, and didn't Joseph say, "Hey, I need you guys to return now"? And they're like, well, we ain't gonna do that. Right. So yeah, I mean, maybe if they had returned right away, I don't know. But now you can really expect Joseph to be a little upset with them.
Because it seems to me like the only calculus so far, they're not waiting. First of all, it's been almost 2 years, by the way. I did the math.
Really?
Yeah, it's been almost 2 years. I did a whole timeline.
Crap.
I did a whole timeline on the Joseph narrative.
That is a bad thought.
It's been roughly a year and a half that Simeon's been in prison.
Owie.
And so here's what we know, though. If they're not afraid that he's already dead, and if they're not afraid that they could be dead by returning, then that could really only mean one reason for their lack of return, and that is simply that Jacob is willing to give up the life of Simeon to ensure that the life of Benjamin isn't taken.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like 1-to-1, right? That's the only reason. Because the brothers are willing to go.
Right. Yeah.
Which means Jacob again is like, well, I like this one better.
Right.
Therefore, I'm going to let the other one suffer. Does that seem to be the situation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a good.
Yeah. Anyways, let's read verses 3 through 7 and see what comes, because there's some discussion about whether or not they should go back.
But Judah said to him, the man warned us solemnly, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go. Because the man said to us, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. Well, where did I? All right, Israel asked, why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother? It's not his fault. They replied, the man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. Is your father still living? He asked us. Do you have another brother? We simply answered his question. How were we to know he would say, bring your brother down? You can already tell who wrote this based on what Jacob is called. I don't remember him being called Israel before this. Maybe one other time. No. I don't know who it is, but I presume certain people called him Israel.
It's true, and a lot of commentators have pointed out that it's the weaving of two narratives, which is why you can trace a change in tone and language. For example, in this passage, we see a lot of distance. The brothers are called the men. Joseph is called the man.
Yeah. I was thinking about that, actually.
Those phrases get used over and over again in this section of the narrative. And then as well, we have, rather than the name Jacob, we have the name Israel getting employed as well, which is something that's kind of new. And so obviously this has been, a lot of people like Friedman, who wrote the Bible Sources Revealed. He's one of the preeminent scholars on the documentary hypothesis.
I mean, who wrote the Bible?
Well, he wrote that book too, actually.
Oh, he wrote 2 books.
Yeah, he wrote that book. He wrote Who Wrote the Bible, and he wrote another one called The Bible with Sources Revealed,
okay,
where he outlined the first 5 books of the Bible. I don't think he did the whole Bible.
That would be a long
It's just the Torah.
That would take a long time.
And then he outlined who wrote what: the priestly, the Deuteronomist, the Yahwist, or the Elohist. Anyways, according to him, this is due in part because the narrative is going back and forth between the 2 different authors.
Right.
And interestingly enough, he believes that this section where it talks about Israel was done by the Yahwist. I'm sure scholars will debate on who's writing what section, but the fact remains that I think your observation is a good one. Odd that the name is just now randomly switching, as well as like the method in which people are speaking.
Yeah.
Right?
I kept thinking, are they going to mention?
Right.
And they did. It's like
the man.
Yeah, the man.
Right. It's kind of an odd intrusion into the text.
Yeah, I mean, he's their brother, not just.
Right, exactly. Well, they don't know. They don't know.
Oh,
it.
yeah, that's right.
But the narrator knows.
Right, yeah, right.
And up till now, the narrator has been calling him Joseph.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And up till now, the narrator has been calling the brothers the brothers. Right? It's odd now that we get this distant language.
Right. I understand that they had to weave 2 different narratives together, but it still feels like somebody should have said, hey, why don't we make them sound better together, you know?
Right, I get that. And I'm sure there was some cleaning up of the text. It might have read even worse. When they initially weaved them together, it might have been way worse, but they cleaned it up to this point. That makes sense. Yeah.
I like that Jacob is so indignant. He's like, how dare you tell this random stranger, also the guy in charge of food distribution in Egypt, and just generally all around someone who could really make the life miserable, that you have another brother. The number of brothers you have was meant to be a secret that we guarded with our very lives.
Yeah, and another interesting thing, listen to the response that they gave. They literally said that we were simply answering his questions.
Right, yeah.
Which is a lie. That's not what happened. They offered up the information freely.
Oh, did they?
In chapter 42:11, it says, but he said to them, no, you have come to see the nakedness of the land. Because remember, they were being accused of being spies.
Yeah.
So Joseph says, "No, you've come to see the nakedness of the land." And they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. In fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more."
Oh, I guess I didn't pick up on that. Yeah.
So even now, they're casting off blame,
Yeah.
right? They're like, no, we didn't just randomly offer up the information about Benjamin. We were being quizzed by the Pharaoh. What other choice did we have?
Right.
Clearly, they had another choice, didn't they? They could have just not brought it up.
Yeah, that's true.
Although, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
If they hadn't have offered up the information, what are the odds that Joseph would have asked them?
Mm-hmm.
Seemed pretty likely.
Right.
Right?
I mean, that was all part of his plan, right?
Yeah. Because Joseph knew who they were.
Yeah.
Right. Anyways, I think the information would have come out anyways.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like Jacob's trying to pass the sons.
That seems to be a genetically inherited trait among these people. None of them can actually take responsibility.
Right.
Except for apparently Judah, which we'll see.
Yeah.
Let's read 8 through 10.
Then Judah said to Israel, his father, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live, but also not die." Important.
Because there's that's apparently the only thing that can happen if you don't live. I'm pretty sure you need to spell that out.
Mm-hmm. "I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice." So here we have Judah basically saying that if he doesn't return with Benjamin, then punished. I'm curious how this was an enticement. I mean, if he loses Benjamin, then he gets to punish Judah. I guess this was just Judah's way of saying that he would be very careful to make sure Benjamin returned.
Yeah, I think so. And interesting now, listen who's speaking up. It's Judah. In the section of the narrative, which most commenters believe was written by the Yahwist, it is who else? The favored son, Judah, who's speaking up. But that being said, Reuben disappears. We won't really hear about Reuben ever again.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he gone until he gets punished. But in Genesis 42:37, Reuben offered protection for Benjamin by guaranteeing his safety by swearing on the lives of his sons. Interesting enough. So Reuben offers up his sons. Judah, on the other hand, seems a little more elevated than that. He offers up basically his own life to be accountable for Benjamin.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was on purpose or if it just happened to turn out that way.
If I had two sons, I would not want to offer them up. So I don't know if that's really, I think it's kind of maybe equal in a way.
Well, which is a more righteous act?
Oh, righteous, yes.
Offering up your sons or offering up yourself?
Probably yourself.
Right? So it could be merely coincidental. I just found it interesting. But listen to the words of Judah, though. Judah is very interesting because he says to himself he says to his father, there's really no other choice. Like, this is not something we can debate anymore.
Right.
Right? And I think it'll become clear in the next couple of verses that Jacob agrees. So it's either we go get the grain or
Which
we
is crazy.
Stay here and die.
Because I was under the impression that Jacob was kind of, rich, wealthy, what have you.
He is, but where are you going to get grain from?
I don't know, but he's rich,
He is rich, but you need to eat something, don't you?
Sure, but he also had a lot of livestock, have you?
Sure, but they weren't really in the habit of eating meat for every meal. Plus, you need your livestock.
No. I just meant, I don't know.
The man is wealthy.
Right, so.
But you have to eat something.
Sure, but.
You can't eat your gold and silver.
I just feel like he should have easily been able to go to any. say, "Hey, I'll buy some food." He
Like
didn't
who?
whoever. I mean,
Well, who was there?
whoever else was there.
You've got the Hittite Empire to the far north, and you've got the Egyptian Empire to the south, which was pretty decidedly closer.
Okay. Well, there had to have been some marketplaces. I mean, didn't they take their sheep somewhere?
Yeah, so the question is, did any people who like owned marketplaces, could they have not gone into Egypt themselves and brought the grain back to sell it?
Oh, yeah.
Which it's possible that some people did that, but remember, this is a family of about 75 people, right? They're probably not going to rock up at a marketplace and buy out all the grain.
Why not?
That's like saying you have 75 people in your family. Are you just going to go to the Giant Eagle grocery store and buy 75 people's worth of bread for the next year?
Why not?
Because they don't have it.
You don't think?
No. Have you been to Giant Eagle?
They have enough bread for a year.
Not for 75 people.
You don't think?
I know they don't. I can guarantee you they don't have more than 100 loaves there.
I'm pretty sure they have like more than that.
They don't.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, how many loaves of bread would you need for 75 people for a whole year?
Well, I don't know. How much does...
Well, imagine they had a loaf of bread a week per person.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got 75 per week.
Okay, but...
times 52.
Yeah.
A lot of loaves of bread.
Well, yes.
So I say all that to say this. They can't just roll up to the market and demand enough food for all their people, because there's a bunch of them. And we don't know that those markets even existed.
Well, where did they go to shop their sheep around?
They did go to the city.
Yeah,
If you go to Shechem, which is where they went to previously, if you go to Shechem, there was a sheep shearing or an animal shearing situation. I don't know if you would call that a market. It was more or less like a gathering.
Well, I mean, they were gonna get some money for their sheep, right?
Presumably, yeah.
Well, then somebody's got to be selling something there.
You would think people would be assembled there, buying and selling during the sheep shearing season. But we don't know that there was like a stable market there. And you also have to remember, if there's a famine in the land, meaning all of Canaan, even if the people who owned markets, even if they could obtain grain and bread, it doesn't seem likely that they would be able to obtain enough grain and bread to feed the entire land of Canaan, right? Obviously, that would be rationed.
How was it determined how much Egypt gave you? I mean, were you able to say, "Hey, I got 75 mouths to feed"?
Well, obviously, it was just by money. They would probably sell you as much as you had money for.
Oh, well, that means poor people are still going to not have any food.
Well, if you read the rest of the story, there's a way that they get food.
Yeah?
I don't want to give it to you.
Please don't.
We're going to get there.
All right, yeah.
Everybody gets fed.
If that's a spoiler alert, that's fine with me.
Everybody in Egypt gets fed.
I assume this is manna from heaven.
No, it's not manna.
Quail? Is it quail?
Remember when they collected all the grain? Says that it was innumerable, more than the sand on the seashores.
I don't remember.
They basically have endless storehouses of grain, which means no matter how many people turn up with money or goats or sheep to get grain, they got grain for them.
Well, then they should charge not a lot of money.
I don't know how much they charged.
Or they should see how much they have and then charge on a sliding.
Yeah, I don't.
Do you think they did that?
I have no idea.
You must have.
Well, the text doesn't say.
Yeah, but you've read other books.
I have. And I'm sure there is a historical text out there that tells you roughly what like a measure of grain, like an ephah would be, but I don't know what it is.
All right. Come back to this.
Yeah, we'll come back to it though.
Yeah. All right.
I think we're reading 8 through. No, we just read 8. Yeah, we just read 8 through 10. So now we got to read 11 through 14.
And their father Israel said to them, "It must be, or rather, if it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift. A little balm and a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also, and go back to the men at once. And may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved.
Isn't it interesting in this section? It doesn't say Yahweh or God. It says God Almighty, which is most likely some variant of El Elyon or El Shaddai. And it doesn't say Israel. It says their father Israel. Isn't that interesting? It tells us it's their father.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever read the God Almighty.
You don't hear that too often.
Genesis.
Right. He doesn't really pop up too often. I think the meeting that Abraham had with Melchizedek, it was the first time that the name comes up. I think this is the second time that the name comes up.
Wonder why.
But the name God Almighty in the Old Testament is heavily linked to the Elohist section of text. Anyways, to me, like, so yeah, the most logical, yeah.
I keep forgetting what color.
Oh yeah, I'm reading.
Like, oh, is this my stuff? I'm smart.
So here, I think Jacob is being pretty shrewd, right? He's like, okay, well, if there's no other choice but to go back, this is how we're going to do it. He doesn't just bring them double the silver back, but he brings them like gifts that are not native to Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And myrrh sounds like a boring gift. You're like, oh, who really cares? He brought nuts and pistachios and myrrh. Yeah, myrrh is usually described as like a tree sap, except it was thick. So when you scar the bark of a tree, a particular type of tree, it would the tree sap would coagulate on the outside of the scar, on the outside of the marking, just like our blood. Like if I cut my thumb, my blood will coagulate on top of the skin to keep it from bleeding, right? Well, that's the same way a lot of these tree saps worked. They would go to the surface, and then they would coagulate, and they would turn into like a gum. If they were left there long enough, they would turn hard, hard enough that you couldn't really press it into a shape. But anyways, myrrh and frankincense are two sides of the same coin. They come from different types of trees, but they were used widely in the ancient Near East as incense.
Okay.
They're also used widely to treat different things like bacterial infections because they were believed to be like an antiseptic.
But were they for real?
Yeah. And it also turned out too that they were good for treating mouth pain. So like if you had a broken tooth, you could take the gum, the myrrh gum or the frankincense gum, and you could mold it over top of your tooth, and it would actually hold for a little while, and it would keep the debris from getting in your tooth, and it would actually treat it as an antiseptic, and on top of it, it would help prevent further decay and infection.
You know what I think is interesting?
Yeah.
Oh, well then tell me.
Well, it was also used for the embalming practices.
What I think is interesting is that there are so many plants out there. They have so many medicinal use. You know what I mean? Like, this was all part of God's plan to give everybody ways to deal with all the stuff in the world. I don't know. It's neat.
I do agree. I think I have nothing against modern medicine, but I do think some parts of modern medicine are a little bit redundant. They're solving problems that honestly sometimes have already been solved.
Yeah.
That's not to say that that myrrh and frankincense are an adequate way to treat mouth problems.
Yeah.
But I would suggest that it was better than nothing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, obviously we have better stuff now, but we do have in the ancient Egyptian records, which I've read pretty extensively, we do have records of the pharaohs sending groups of people to go retrieve both frankincense and myrrh. They sent people all the way up to the Lebanon forest to get these tree saps. And they also sent people deep into Africa because they didn't have the same trees on the northern plains where Egypt was. So they would send people hundreds of miles away to get these various products. So the idea that Jacob would send myrrh with his sons, not just snacks, but would actually bring them a product that was pretty highly favored and expensive, was a pretty smart move.
All right. So do you think it's a coincidence that all these different trees and plants had all these medicinal qualities that happen to for the humans?
Or do I think that this was something that God designed?
Yeah, right. That's what I'm saying.
Well, it could be a little bit of both, right? There could definitely be some plants that were put here by God specifically for us to use for medicinal purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be that we just discovered that some of them can be used for medicinal purposes. But here's where I would land on the topic. If God indeed put something like plants here for medicinal purposes,
Mm-hmm.
he didn't tell anyone about it. We still had to discover it on our own.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So my understanding is if God put these here specifically for the uses that they're using them for,
Mm-hmm.
it's confusing that he wouldn't just tell us.
Well, I mean, humans generally figure things out.
Right. So, but if they're only used medicinally because humans figured it out,
right?
How would we know that God intended for us to figure it out?
I
That's what I'm saying, right?
humans figure out all sorts without God
Right.
telling us that they're there.
Right. Well, we figured out how to get to the moon. Does that mean that God wanted us to be on the moon?
I mean, we figured out how to eat fruit and vegetables and all that. Did God ever say, "Hey, just so you know, carrots are edible"?
Yeah.
He did.
And we read it already in Genesis when God said that he gave them all the produce of the land to eat. And then after the flood, he also said you can now eat the animals. Well, God told you what you can eat, right?
So it's just a coincidence that there are plants like aloe vera that help humans out?
I think so. Well, my only suggestion is that if God planned for human beings to find these plants and to use them for medicinal purposes,
Mm-hmm.
he never once mentions it.
I mean,
so how would we know?
They figured it out.
Right.
They figured it out.
That's what I'm saying. How would we know that was God's intention?
There are a lot of things that we don't.
Right. Right.
It just seems like a strange coincidence to have everything around a purpose for our body and just say it's just a random change. They happen to perfect for, like taking a headache away or something.
Right, but I mean, half of those plants will also kill you.
Yeah.
Right? So if God's goal is for us to figure it out, it's a pretty sadistic goal, because in the process of figuring out, roughly half of the people figuring things out are going to die for eating the wrong plant. You know what I mean?
I don't know what to say to that one.
That's right.
Well, let's continue.
Yes, I think on that while we read 15 through 18.
Yeah.
All right.
So the men took the gifts and double the amount of silver, and Benjamin also. They hurried down to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare a meal. They are to eat with me at noon." The man did as Joseph told him and took the men to Joseph's house. Now the men were frightened when they were taken to his. They thought, we were brought here because of the silver that was put back into our sacks the first time. He wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkey.
Yeah. As we've noted previously,
Yeah.
we're still seeing this interesting disconnection of language where people are called the men, or the man. It's certainly, chapter 42 is certainly a strange chapter in the language, the way they word things.
I don't like that. It's really hard to keep track of who we're talking about.
Right.
No, I don't know.
Right.
Just say the sons.
Right.
Don't have to be all.
So you had some notes here on the lunchtime, the luncheon.
So Joseph invites them to dine with him and tells the chef or whoever to slaughter a delicious animal. And obviously her brothers think this is a trap.
Sure.
What kind of trap would be set by inviting people to dine with you? If anything, they should be honored, right? I mean, didn't the Pharaoh himself say that Joseph was second only to him, which I doubt even God would ever say to anyone, but that's besides the point. My point is, if you're invited to dine with Joseph, it's got to be a...
Yeah, you would think so. There's kind of a weird thing in the story. Like, so at this point in time, it's not clear that they know that they're going to dine with them. But at some point, like in the next couple of verses, the steward of the house is going to tell them, hey, you're going to dine with the man, as it is said, right? But to your point, what would they be thinking? If the Pharaoh's second-hand man said, hey, you're going to dine with the Pharaoh, would they be thinking, well, this is good favor? Or would they be thinking, boy, this sounds like a trap?
Yeah, I mean, you'd be pretty afraid because there's no reason for them to dine with the Pharaoh, obviously.
Well, not only that, remember, the last time they were there, they were accused of being spies.
Yeah, right.
Right? And then Simeon is still in prison.
So maybe they're not going to dine with them. Maybe that's just what they said.
It could be. It could be that the steward says that they're going to dine, but in their minds, they're like, you mean die? We're going to die here.
Yeah.
Just like our brother Simeon, because Simeon has not been brought out to them.
Right.
Yet. Okay, so for all as they know, and remember, they waited over a year and a half to return.
Right.
These dummies. Okay, so not only are they probably like, well, bad things might be coming, but also we kind of screwed up because we should have come here over a year ago and we failed to. I think in their mind, I don't know, being invited to dinner, I don't think that really would have put them at ease.
I guess that's a good point.
You know what I mean?
I do want to say one thing, though. Why were they worried about their donkeys? Nobody wants their stupid donkey. Donkeys are a big responsibility. I mean, we're not talking about a cat here.
So, as it turns out, donkeys were incredibly valuable, as were the slaves. Remember, the brothers brought slaves and donkeys, and were afraid that both of them were going to get taken by the...
What? The brothers brought slaves?
Yeah, go back up to the passage that you just read.
Yeah.
It says he wants to attack us and overpower us.
Sees us as slaves.
Oh, I read that wrong. The first time I read it, I thought it says seize our slaves and take our donkeys. Okay. You're right. I apologize for that. So, nevertheless, the slave issue aside, it's definitely clear though that the donkeys were in fact valuable. They were a pack animal. They were used for travel. They were even used for farm work. Like, you didn't always plow with an oxen, right? And in fact, if you go fast forward to chapter 47, the people that are in the land, once they run out of money to buy grain, because eventually people just run out of money, they start trading their donkeys and other animals to buy the grain.
Okay.
It's also true that donkeys produced other things. You know, you could in fact use their milk. It wasn't preferred.
Really? Oh.
But it happened. Yeah, donkeys were just another, form of livestock. They had value. They weren't as cool as horses, but they were definitely.
Did you ride them though?
You could ride them. Remember, Jesus rode 2 of them.
Oh yeah, that's right.
In Matthew 21, I believe.
Yeah, the Palm Sunday thing.
Yeah, Palm Sunday. Could remember if you read the prophecy in Zechariah 9:9, it says, "See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, riding on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey."
See, I'm just saying, there are a lot of passages in the Testament that really point to Jesus. That's really cool. Really cool.
Anyways, so Jesus, according to Matthew, because Matthew was reading it in Greek, not in Hebrew, he got the impression that it was referring to somebody riding 2 different donkeys. And so Matthew, the other 2 evangelists, the other 2 synoptic gospels picture him riding 1 donkey, whereas Matthew depicts him riding both donkeys at once.
How do you ride 2 donkeys?
Well, there's some opinions on that. Anyways, that's a whole nother side topic. That's a whole nother. I love the double donkey passage from Matthew, but that being said, donkeys were rather valuable even in Egypt, but they were not like horses. You know what I mean? So the horses were not considered to be as dirty and unclean as donkeys were. The donkeys and the other pack animals were kind of considered to be dirty and unclean.
What other pack animals?
Well, let's think. You would have the oxen and the cattle, things like that. Anyways.
Oh, okay. Well, fine. So I'll be honest. I still wouldn't want a donkey if somebody offered. I'd be like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Well, we don't live in ancient Egypt.
We don't, but I'm just saying.
But if we did,
I prefer a cat. All right.
I mean, donkeys are basically a form of currency. In fact, my old pastor, when he was a missionary, he did mission trips in Africa. He had, this would have been in the late 90s, he had the locals there offered to buy his daughter in payment with donkeys.
Oh. Okay.
So even in modern day Africa,
how many donkeys was she with?
Well, I don't know.
Hopefully a lot.
But she was valuable because
she's 5.
Because she was
female. Yeah.
She was blonde, and you don't get a lot of blondes in Africa.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And they offered to pay for her in donkeys.
Well, that's sweet of them.
He said no.
I'm glad for that.
Anyways.
Right. Let's see. 19 to 23?
That's right. Let's read it.
When they drew near to the steward of Joseph's house, they talked with him at the door of the house. Look, Joseph's house instead of the man's house.
Isn't it interesting how the narrator suddenly shifts?
And said, "Oh, sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, but it happened when we came to the encampment that we opened our sacks, and there each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we have brought it back in our hand, and we have brought down other money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks." But he said, "Peace be with you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them. Bam. So this entire charade that was orchestrated by Joseph was basically spoiled by a random doorman or something. Brings him out before Joseph even gets a chance to go, surprise! He did all that work, and now they already know. I'm sure Joseph was still going like, they're going to get him.
Well, I'm not entirely sure if Joseph at this point wants them to think that they're in trouble or not in trouble.
Why did he run away and cry?
Well, because he was overwhelmed by his emotions.
Right. Yeah, but he ran away because he didn't want to show them, that he was sad, because then they'd think something was up, isn't that right?
Well, they would definitely think something is up, but it's possible that if he displayed his emotion, that they might get suspicious that something strange is happening with this one particular person. In fact, it might cause them to draw closer to him to inspect his face and see who he is. Because remember, even when they ate the meal before, they didn't even eat together. They met separately. They ate at separate locations inside of the house because the Egyptians and the Hebrews couldn't dine together.
Right.
So we're not actually sure at this point if they've actually come close to Joseph yet to even be able to really inspect his face to see who he is.
All right, but you would still agree that this doorman like kind of ruined the surprise, right? Or am I wrong?
Well, that's what I'm saying is I don't know if the surprise necessarily is whether or not they're in trouble when they come back. I think that's kind of irrelevant.
Really?
Because I think in the next few verses, Joseph is very pleasing and welcoming to them and is trying to put them at ease.
Yeah.
It's possible that Joseph wants this to be viewed as a kind and welcoming situation so that they're unprepared for the next trick that he's about to play. Meaning he's kind of calming their nerves.
Right. What's the next
so that
trick?
the next trick is like doubly as good.
Oh, doubly it.
Because what is about to come is definitely going to be a surprise to them.
Right.
They're not going to see it coming.
Right.
Right.
But they definitely wouldn't see it coming if they were, still thought they were in trouble.
Well, if they thought they were in trouble, then I think it would be difficult to follow through with everything. Because remember, the next thing that happens, he fills their sack up with grain, and he sends them on their way again, right? If he gave them the impression that they were in trouble for the first time they came around, then it would be odd that he wouldn't just throw them in prison. So at some point, he has to kind of smooth over the first visit so that he can make sure that the second visit goes as planned.
And that they will bring Jacob. Jacob didn't go with them.
Jacob didn't go, but the goal here is not to get Jacob there. The goal was to get Benjamin there.
Okay.
But the goal to get Benjamin there is to play his second trick. And his second trick is the most important trick, and that is to determine if the brothers have actually changed.
Right. Okay.
Remember?
I forgot about that.
So my understanding is that the first trick is literally only there to help enable them to get to the second trick, which is all about Benjamin.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I forgot that he was trying to. They were.
Right.
Okay.
All right, verses 24 through 28.
So the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them their feed, and he gave their donkeys feed. Then they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they would eat bread. And when Joseph came down, they brought him the present, which was, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house and bowed down before the earth. Then he asked them about their well-being and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he alive?" And they answered, "Your servant, our father, is in good health." And they bowed their heads down and prostrated themselves.
Yeah. So it seems after meeting with the steward of the house that they are informed that there would be a meal.
Okay.
But like a couple questions. It says that we just read that they were informed that there would be bread to eat.
Yeah.
But the steward of the house was instructed to go kill an animal. I guess we could assume that there'd be more than just bread to eat.
Is that exciting to have bread to eat?
No.
Okay.
It's not. So, I mean, just kind of curious. If it's true, if we're reading the story completely dead literal, okay? If it's true that the steward only told them that there would be bread, what kind of surprise would be on their face when they brought out like a full 4-course meal and wine and everything, right?
And like tiramisu and stuff.
Right. Would they be like surprised and happy about this change of events?
They would have to be, right?
You would think so.
Yeah.
Right?
Hey.
Or would it be over the top? See, because if you just brought bread and like a basin to wash your feet, that's like customary for hospitality.
Okay.
You're just, arranging for the strangers. But if you provide a whole feast for them, that's like kind of over the top. But is it over the top for Joseph? Because Joseph is second in command in all of the land.
Right.
So is that just normal for a guy in his position?
I doubt it. I mean, does he go over the top for every person that comes there?
You wouldn't think so.
Right.
You wouldn't.
Though I doubt he even gives everybody bread.
Right. Well, I mean, Joseph would, but normally they probably wouldn't.
Right.
You kind of get the idea from the story that Joseph is a good guy.
Okay.
But anyways, I don't really have much to say about that particular section other than I found it odd that the steward said you're going to have bread, but Joseph is clearly planning much more than bread. So the man brought them into Joseph's house and gave them water, and when they washed their feet, they gave their donkey feed. Then they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they would eat bread there. That's it. Yeah. It says in verse 16, Joseph saw Benjamin with them, and he said to the steward of the house, "Take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare a meal to eat with them at noon." Yeah, so he told the steward to prepare a meal.
Then the steward would know.
That's what I'm saying, is if we're reading the text dead literal, are we to believe that the steward did not tell them they were having a full meal, or did he merely tell them that there's some bread for them? Right? And if the steward only told the brothers that Joseph has prepared bread for them, would they be happily surprised to learn that it's not just bread, they're also getting to eat like a fattened calf, and they're going to get wine,
probably,
and other things? You'd think they'd be pretty happy.
Last meal or something.
That's a very good point I didn't think about. What do you think any of them are thinking, well, this is way more than we deserve. This is unusual. This is not the type of greeting you would get with standard hospitality. Are we being prepared to be slaughtered and imprisoned? But they did bring out the brother. Remember, Simeon was let loose.
That's right.
So I think there's some confusing signals. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah, I get that. All right, I agree.
Yeah, let's read 29 through 31.
Then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to my son." Now his heart yearned too for his brother. So Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. And he went into his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and he restrained himself and said, "Serve the bread."
Interesting, he said, "Serve the bread." When we know there was other food there.
Well, I mean, was the bread, like an appetizer or what have you? Or was it usually served with the meat?
It was usually served with everything else. Although, to bring up a good point, I didn't look it up in Hebrew, but typically the word for bread is the same word as for food often. Like bread and food were basically the same thing.
Okay, well then could be it right there, huh?
Yeah, classically it's a little hard to tell.
Or we just saying serve the meal.
Right. There was another word for food in Hebrew, ochel, which comes from the verb echel, which means to eat. And that gets used for food sometimes. But, I mean, honestly, a lot of times in the Old Testament, when it says food, the underlying Hebrew word for food and for bread often are literally just the same thing.
Okay.
Right?
Well, that makes it more difficult to know what.
I know.
That happens a lot, though, huh?
It really does.
I mean, it's not like we don't have a bunch of similar words like that, that have, like bank,
Yeah, exactly. Words with double meanings.
Yeah, or triple.
Not confusing at all.
No. So I think that maybe the reason Joseph was so happy to see his brother, Benjamin, is because he was the only brother that was too young have anything to do with his attempted murder / selling into slavery.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I didn't notice that until you pointed it out. My initial instinct was just because they were the only full-blooded brothers.
Yeah.
Right? But I think that's a very good point, and I looked through a number of commentaries, and I didn't see anybody else raising that point.
Oh, man. That's like a point for me then.
You're basically a scholar at this point. But to what you said, I think it's 1,000,000% correct. Benjamin, as far as we can tell, even if he was old enough to go with his brothers, which I don't think he was, I'm not really convinced that he participated in any of the shenanigans that involved him getting sold. If anything, he would have just been a bystander, because he's been in Egypt now for 22 years. Benjamin would have been a child when this happened.
Like how old?
Well, so Benjamin most likely would have been anywhere between like 3 and 10.
There you go.
So Joseph was 17 when they sold him. And I forget how many years passed between Joseph and Benjamin's birth. But needless to say, if Joseph was 17, then it's reasonable to conclude that his brother...
22 years?
Yeah, I know.
Are you sure? I thought it was like 2 years.
I did the math. It's been 22 years because he was 17 when they sold him.
Yeah. And
then the year, there's 7 years of good and 7 years of famine. Right? The first year of the good, when he's appointed over the land of Egypt, the text says that he was 30. And then there are 5 years of good. And then after 2 years of famine, they return to the land a second time. So between being sold at 17 and between his current age now, which must have been 37 years, so you've got basically 22 years. Right?
Boy, that means little Benjamin is...
He's all grown up. Which would lead you to question, how could he recognize Benjamin?
Yeah, and it's especially since they don't recognize him at all.
Yeah, if Benjamin was a child, and you recognize him now as an adult 22 years later...
He definitely looked different.
Is it not maybe a little bit odd that nobody in the family could recognize Joseph?
Right.
But that's a recurring theme in the Bible.
But you know what? I bet Benjamin probably didn't go out with them because he's so young. I mean, I don't know at what age go and... what were the brothers doing exactly? Joseph was coming to spy on them.
Well, I think they were just tending to the sheep.
Okay. Well, do you think that at what age, like, somebody started?
Oh, I don't know. You know, they started young. I bet you would probably start herding the flocks around age 11 or 12.
Okay. Well, then, I mean, he probably still was not doing that. Probably wasn't involved.
I agree. I don't think Benjamin was at all involved in the selling of Jacob or the selling of Joseph into Egypt.
Yeah.
So to your point, there are two things here that are really important. The first thing is that Joseph has no reason to blame Benjamin for being sold.
Right.
And then on top of that, Joseph and Benjamin are the only two sons of their mother. They're the only two full-blooded brothers that, Joseph's only got one full-blooded brother, and that's Benjamin. So he's got to have a special connection to Benjamin.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Can you blame him? I wouldn't. You know what I mean? I wouldn't blame him. Very believable part of the story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Let's read verses 22 and 23.
All right. Wasn't there something else there?
Oh, I don't think so.
But look at this.
Yep.
What did we...
Well, yeah, so I did write a note here if you want to read it. It is interesting here that Joseph invokes a blessing over his brothers by using the name Elohim in a way that is clearly not referring to multiple gods. Remember we had a discussion earlier on the previous chapter whether or not when Joseph uses the phrase Elohim, he actually says Ha Elohim, which means the God or the gods.
Okay.
And we had discussed whether or not he was actually saying the gods or if he was actually saying the God.
Right.
Now, I think there was reason to believe when we discussed it previously that he was referring to the gods plural.
Mm.
However, when I read this particular passage, it doesn't seem to me that you could even insert the gods. It says, and he said, God be gracious to you, my son.
I don't know. The gods be gracious.
Well, that's the thing. Let me pull it up in Hebrew real quick. So this is going to be Genesis 43, verse 29. And let's just see what's actually in the text. If it says Ha Elohim, I'd be really curious to know.
Okay.
It says, he lifted up his eyes and he saw Benjamin, his brother, son of his mother, and said, this your younger brother whom you spoke to me. And he said, yeah. And he said, Vayomer in Hebrew, Elohim, God be gracious to you. Okay, so he doesn't say Ha Elohim, he just says Elohim.
Mhm.
And in this particular context, I could only assume that means like actual Elohim.
Right.
Right? But wouldn't that be like a strange giveaway that you weren't Egyptian?
Right.
No Egyptian would say Elohim in the singular.
No, I mean, he is.
Or is it a kind of a plot hole?
No, I mean, he was about to reveal everything anyhow, so.
Well, not yet.
He was about to.
Not till after he plays the trick.
Oh, well, then, fine.
Right? He's got to play the trick before he reveals himself.
I guess that's true. Well, then.
So is this just an editor's mistake?
Very likely. Very likely.
Yeah. We've seen the Yahwist hand has been at work in this chapter.
Mm.
Is it possible that the Yahwist changed Ha Elohim to Elohim to remove the implication of multiple gods because the Yahwist was strictly monotheist?
Yeah, very possible.
Possible. I'm just throwing guesses out there. I don't really know.
Yeah.
Anyways, I thought that was interesting.
It might be the gods be gracious.
Right. The original text might have said, the gods be gracious to you, my son. And in fact, I probably should have looked it up in the Greek Septuagint, and I probably could have looked it up in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well to see if there were any variants.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, there's only so much time in a day.
I get that.
It's not critical to what we're talking about today, but it is interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe after we're done here, we'll look it up and see what it says, if there's any variant texts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful. Not at all boring. All right. 32 to 33.
That's right.
So they set him a place by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptian who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked in astonishment. So his brothers must have known Joseph was at least a Hebrew.
I don't think so, because he segregated himself from them during the meal.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He doesn't give any indications that he's a Hebrew, does he?
I mean, you said they looked quite a bit different, right?
Yeah, but he could have easily shaved his head, shaved his beard, wore the Egyptian makeup, wore the Egyptian headdress. Like, he could have done enough that he could have appeared as an Egyptian.
Yeah.
You know?
So who did he ate by himself then?
Yeah,
Is that
right.
normal, or?
Yeah, they set a place by himself, and they by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves. So all of them ate separately.
Okay. Oh.
So they weren't like sharing a meal at the same table.
Yeah, because what would happen if? Well, the brothers didn't know he was not Egyptian, but everybody else did.
See, that's the thing, is I have reason to believe that like his palace attendants, his officials, his household servants, they probably knew, you know. He would have had to warn them, hey, don't tell these other people. But you think they'd be in on it. The steward seems to be in on it. He seems to know what's happening. Right?
Maybe,
maybe not.
This is the part where you say because.
Well, we don't. I don't really know.
All right. Well, you said he seems to be in on it, but then you didn't say why that.
But to your point, it is a little bit suspicious that they don't recognize their own brother.
Well, I was just thinking, if they knew he was not his brothers, the other Egyptian, and he he ate with them, would that be like insult?
So that's if Joseph ate with the Egyptians and not the Hebrews?
Yeah. With the Egyptians, when they find out, a bit unhappy about that.
They would be, but listen to this, because the wording is not entirely clear. In 32, it says, they set him a place by himself.
Mm-hmm.
And them, meaning the brothers, by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves. Those are three groups of people here. Mm-hmm. There's the brothers by themselves, the Egyptians by themselves, Joseph by himself.
Good night.
Which includes Joseph.
Well, so they must have.
Well, we don't know that.
But that's the only. Otherwise, Joseph would have eaten.
No. Could it be perhaps that Joseph's brothers would have taken that just to mean that Joseph can't be seen eating with commoners? How many kings, how many pharaohs were seen eating meals with their servants?
Oh, they're in the same room, aren't they?
Right. But did they sit at the same table and eat meals with their servants?
Probably not.
Probably not. So the question I have is this eating arrangement normal, or would this have kind of tipped somebody off? And is it possible, just presupposing a few things here, is it possible that the reason why he didn't eat with his Egyptian servants is because they knew that he wasn't Egyptian?
That's what I'm saying. Bam.
Right. But
well,
what I'm saying,
those are his servants. I thought they were like maybe other dignitaries.
Well, that's a good point. We don't know who they are. It just says the other Egyptians.
Why would he ever servants? Ever.
Right.
Same room anywhere.
Right. So that's my question.
So it has to be some other high up Egyptian, right?
Well, no, it's possible that they all ate in the same room or even the same household, even if they weren't at the same location at the table.
No, I'm just saying, why would he eat in the same room as one of his servants?
Well, because that's when the food was ready.
I appreciate that, but I presume they would eat later. They certainly don't eat the same type of food. Right?
That's a good question. It depends on the person in charge. Some people were gracious and some people were not. Right? Mm-hmm. Some people ate scraps of the master.
Right.
And some people ate with the master. It was more or less typical, though, not to eat at the same table as the master.
Yeah.
But that being said, if you're sharing a meal, let's say these are his officials and not his servants. Mm-hmm. Well, if they're your officials, you would eat at the same table with them.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, then this would kind of give off some bells.
That's what I'm saying is it's kind of a strange setup, but I think there's multiple solutions. Mm. One solution was that the other Egyptians knew that he was Hebrew and wouldn't eat with him. Another solution is that they were his servants, and so Joseph obviously is following protocol and not eating a meal at the same table as his servants, right? And if there's a third solution, I'm not aware of it.
So what if they knew he was a Hebrew and he still wanted to eat with them? Joseph still wanted to eat.
Well, that's the thing, is he's high enough in rank that it probably wouldn't matter what they wanted. Joseph would have done what Joseph wanted to do.
Would there be some, muttering under their breaths?
There might be, and I kind of put it in some notes later on, but it's worth mentioning here. The fact that they wouldn't eat with the Hebrews or the Canaanites was not just because they were Hebrew or Canaanite.
Okay.
It was because of the way that they lived, right? So if somebody was willing to come to Egypt and change their lifestyle, change their hygiene, the Egyptians had no problem with you being there.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't because they were Hebrew.
Yeah, they weren't like
That was important.
No, they weren't like racist or anything.
That's what I thought.
No, it had nothing to do with the fact that they're just from a different family line.
Okay.
It had everything to do with the lifestyle and their practices. For example, the Egyptians didn't eat cow. It was a sacred animal for them. They didn't wear animal fabrics.
Right.
And some of the shepherds were considered unclean and impure. They weren't even allowed to enter into the temple quite often. So it was more of a lifestyle issue than it was racism.
But it wasn't like a sanitary thing.
Well, they thought it was sanitary.
Well, like, I mean, the Hebrews would wash their hands and everything, right?
Yeah, they would wash their hands and their feet most likely, before entering into a meal, but even their clothing.
Yeah.
So one of the things that the Egyptians said about the Canaanites, and it was recorded in some of the Greek historians, was essentially that they viewed the Canaanites as being smelly.
Oh, right.
And we'll think about the clothing even that they wore. They wore animal skins and animal fabrics, and they probably didn't have the same level of bathing habits that the Egyptians had.
They didn't have,
Well, they were nomads. They just lived in the wilderness.
I mean, how did the Egyptians do it?
They had baths.
Everybody?
And the Nile River.
Oh, okay. So they have the river.
And aqueducts.
And the Hebrews didn't have rivers?
Well, they did. What I'm saying is that the Egyptian society was highly evolved, and the Hebrews, coming from the land of Canaan, were just a bunch of goat herders that lived in the wilderness. It's like today, if you went into the middle of nowhere, Appalachia, and you found a guy with a beard down to his belt buckle, and you would not look at him the same way you would look at a guy who's a Manhattan lawyer.
Right. Okay.
Two very different classifications of people. The Egyptians are the Manhattan lawyers.
Yeah, I get that.
And the Canaanites are...
So maybe his brothers are looking like they're all rich, but Joseph takes care of himself.
Of course.
Got it.
All I'm saying is that...
Well, then maybe they wouldn't be upset.
The Egyptians weren't racist.
Yeah, that's what I thought this entire time. So.
No, they weren't racist. They just didn't like dirty, stinky, nomadic herdsmen.
Yeah. Most people would agree with it.
It was a cleanliness issue. And remember, they practiced circumcision first, too, which was also for them an issue of cleanliness.
All right.
Yeah.
I like it. All right. Let's see. Wow. Mention all that?
Oh, and I guess I should. So also on the issue of not eating with the Canaanites, in Genesis 36:34 and Exodus 8:26, there are two passages that are relevant to the topic. Genesis 46:34 says, your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our father did. Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all the shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians. So this is a fast forward when they're allowing the brothers and their 70 family members to live in the land of Goshen. There's a really interesting comment that said, they're sent to the land of Goshen, which is essentially south of actual Egypt proper. So they're sent to the outskirts of town to live. And the reason is because all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians. And then in Exodus 8:26, it says, but Moses said, that would not be right. The sacrifices that we offer to the Lord our God would be detestable to the Egyptians. And if we offer sacrifices that are detestable in their eyes, will they not stone us? This is in reference when the plagues are underway and they ask Pharaoh to let us go offer sacrifices in the wilderness. And the Pharaoh says, yeah, but don't go far away. And then Moses responds, no, we kind of have to go far away because our sacrifices are detestable to the Egyptians, which is true because the Egyptians didn't sacrifice the same kinds of animals.
Was this a trick?
Not a trick.
And then they just ran away after that?
No, it wasn't a trick. This was the truth of the matter. The animals that they were sacrificing were animals that were holy to the Egyptians. And the fact that they were sacrificing these holy animals was an abomination to the Egyptians.
Well, why didn't they just sacrifice animals that nobody found offensive to sacrifice?
Because they didn't have those animals.
The Egyptians did?
Not the Hebrews.
But the Hebrews could be like, hey, give you this cow that you wash up.
But remember, the Hebrews settled in the land of Goshen, outside of the city, specifically to herd the animals that the Egyptians detest.
Oh, because there's a lot of them. There wouldn't be any fighting over them.
That's right.
Oh, look at me.
Yeah, the Pharaoh segregated the Hebrews when they moved into the land.
Okay.
He put them down in Goshen as basically a way of segregating them from the Egyptian people proper.
Oh, look at me, I'm learning.
You are.
Nice.
Now, the historian Herodotus, I'm sure you're aware of Herodotus is.
We all are.
Says something similar to the rest of Genesis and Exodus. He says, all the Egyptians sacrificed unblemished bulls and bull calves. They may not sacrifice cows. These are sacred to Isis. For the images of Isis are in a woman's form, horned like a cow, exactly as the Greeks picture low, and cows are held by far the most sacred of all beasts of the herd by all the Egyptians alike. For this reason, no Egyptian man or woman will kiss a Greek man or use a knife or a spit or a cauldron belonging to a Greek, or to taste the flesh of an unblemished bull that has been cut up with a Greek knife. So even into the period of the Greeks, the Egyptians held fast to their practices of cleanliness and uncleanliness in regards to what animals were sacred, which ones could be sacrificed, which ones could be eaten, so on and so forth. It seems to me that they just had a fundamental disagreement with the Canaanites.
Does this say no man or woman will kiss a Greek man?
Yeah.
That's just whatever?
Because they're unclean.
No, I meant, is that a reference to, like, you know?
Greeting.
Oh, okay.
That's how you greeted people.
Oh, I thought this was some sort of an intimate thing.
No.
Oh, all right.
You kissed them on the cheek.
Oh, okay.
Once you put your tongue in someone's mouth, it's irrelevant where they came from. It's,
Okay.
Everyone's mouth is dirty.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who you are. But remember, in the ancient Mediterranean world, you greeted people with a kiss on the cheek.
Okay. Yeah, I did not know that.
Remember, even my ex-wife is Egyptian.
Mm-hmm.
Even today, at all the family gatherings, kiss on the cheek.
Is that right?
Yep.
Wow.
Even for white guys like me, everyone got a kiss on the cheek.
You have to do it then?
Yeah. Yep. It's a little bit different on generation. The newer generation, the generation growing up here in North America, they're like getting rid of that tradition. But the generation that grew up in Egypt, they all still do it. Even like men on men. Pretty normal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. 34. Then he took servings to them from before him. Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs, so they drank and were merry with him. So what's a standard serving of food? Maybe one big drumstick or a 6-ounce steak or something? I guess not a steak since they didn't eat cow. Whatever it is. It was probably enough to feel full. And yet little Benjamin, which I guess is actually an adult now that I think about it, he's got 5 servings. And he's probably like, what am I supposed to do with all this? I'm going to need a couple boxes to take these home. I presume it wasn't actually 5 servings, though. More just like more than everybody else got. Just another biblical exaggeration by the narrators.
Yeah, it could be that it's just an exaggeration. It wasn't really 5 complete full servings. But like to the point, even if it's 2 servings,
right?
Like, how much can you actually eat in one sitting?
Right.
But the other thing too is, I was curious: is Joseph purposely showing favoritism towards Benjamin to invoke the ire of his brothers, much in the way his favoritism angered his brothers when he was little?
Well, I guess so, since we know that his plan is to see if they're gonna sacrifice Benjamin for themselves, basically.
Because we know he couldn't eat 5 times.
Right. Yeah.
So what would be the point in giving him 5 times the amount of food?
Right.
Unless he was just trying to provoke his brothers.
Well, then maybe he did give him a ton of food.
Right.
Right.
Maybe he did.
Yeah.
Just to kind of draw the side eye.
Yeah.
And to see if what the reaction would be.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the thing of it says here that he was given 5 times the amount.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't say the amount of what, right? It says Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. Does that include the wine?
It does say they drank and were merry with him, right?
Right. Are we to conclude that Benjamin drank 5 times the amount of wine as everybody else? Was he like totally like out of his gourd by the end of the night? Right.
I don't know. Did they only drink wine?
I mean, it was customary to have wine with the meal.
Yeah, like maybe when I like a big thing of, liquid. But these people just had their tiny little glasses of wine.
Well, you got to remember at this point too, the wine would have been less aged and less alcoholic.
I mean, okay, so how much would they get?
I mean, 1 glass of wine may have realistically only been like 5 or 6% alcohol.
No, but I mean, just 1 glass. You don't get like.
Oh, I mean, how many could you have?
Or is there a pitcher on the table you can refill?
Yeah, typically, you can get refills.
Okay.
And then, but the thing of it is, we're not actually told how many servings Benjamin gets, unless we assume that when it says he gets 5 times the amount of servings, that he also gets that amount of servings of wine.
Well, maybe he doesn't need to if everybody can.
That's a good point. Are we to believe that they're only giving 1 serving of wine? I don't think so.
No, I mean, a lot of people like to drink a lot when they.
Right.
I drink a lot when I eat.
And it says, and so they drank and they were merry with him, which leads me to believe they lingered after they were done eating and they had a good night of enjoyment and merriment, which probably included multiple drinks for all of them.
Yeah.
Right?
That's how you become merry.
Right. That's how they became merry.
Yeah.
So as long and short of it is, the 5 servings to Benjamin.
Yeah.
A little bit outlandish, but maybe for a good reason.
Mm-hmm.
Any other concluding thoughts?
That is it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we did great.
Well, thank you for being here for chapter 43. We'll be coming at you with chapter 44 very shortly.
Yeah.
We appreciate you. If you think there are other points to this narrative that we missed, add them to the comments. If you think there are solutions to some of these questions and problems that we missed, add them to the comments. We're all here just trying to learn from the text, to learn from each other. Like we say at the beginning of these podcasts, we don't know all the answers. We're just asking questions and seeing what kind of answers we can come up with. And if 2 heads are better than 1, I can imagine 25 heads are better than 2.
Yeah.
About right?
Uh-huh. That's the expression.
Exactly.
All right.
All right, thanks. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.